The gravel crunched beneath Sloane Mitchell's boots as she stared at the foreclosure notice, the morning sun making the red ink too bright, too final. 30 days. After 3 generations of Mitchells had poured sweat and soul into this auto shop, the bank had reduced it all to a number she couldn't pay. Her grandfather's legacy, her legacy summarized in cold corporate font. The paper trembled in her hand, not from the Georgia breeze, but from the familiar tremor that had followed her home from Afghanistan. Max nudged her leg, his shepherd's eyes more perceptive than any human's. The dog knew when the darkness was creeping in, when memories of sand and fire and screaming metal threatened to pull her under. Sloane crouched down, running calloused fingers through his storm-gray fur. "Just you and me now, buddy." Her voice sounded hollow in the empty lot where customers once lined up for the best mechanical work in 3 counties. The shop behind her stood as a monument to better days tools still arranged with military precision. The ancient hydraulic lift that her grandfather had rebuilt in '82, the wall of fading photographs chronicling 70 years of Mitchell family history. The sign above the door, Mitchell & Son Auto Repair, had never been changed, even after her father had abandoned them both, even after her grandfather realized his granddaughter had inherited his mechanical touch. Now it would likely come down before she ever had the chance to replace it with Mitchell and granddaughter. The phone call came as she was organizing socket wrenches, a ritual that calmed her mind when the memories pressed too close. The unknown number made her hesitate. Bill collectors had become increasingly creative. But something made her answer. 2 hours later, she sat across from Martin Reeves, a military attorney with wire-rimmed glasses and a precisely knotted tie, his government-issue briefcase open on her grandfather's cluttered desk. "Your great-uncle Theo Mitchell passed 3 weeks ago. You're his sole beneficiary." His voice carried the efficient clip of someone who delivered life-changing news as routinely as ordering coffee. Sloane's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. "I don't have a great-uncle." Reeves adjusted his glasses. "Theodoric Mitchell, your grandfather's brother, Air Force technical sergeant, served in the Pacific Theater, then worked classified projects until 1967. He left you a property in northern Georgia, 170 acres in the Appalachian foothills, plus whatever's on it." The yellowed photograph Reeves slid across the desk showed a young man in uniform, his face a sharper version of her grandfather's, standing beside an aircraft, his expression serious but eyes bright with something like purpose. On the bun-faded pencil, "Theo, 1944, before final test flight. Land. In this economy, it might be enough to save the shop if she could sell it quickly." "Why me? He never contacted us. I didn't even know he existed." Reeves removed a sealed envelope from the folder. "He left this for you. Said you'd understand when the time came." The paper was thick, expensive, nothing like the bank notice still folded in her pocket. "One more thing, Ms. Mitchell. I've already received 3 inquiries about purchasing the property site unseen. One from a developer named Harrison Wells. He's offering substantially above market value." Something cold settled in Sloane's stomach. Nobody paid above market for unseen mountain property unless they knew something the owner didn't. After the lawyer left, Sloane broke the seal on the envelope, unfolding a letter written in a steady hand. The ink barely faded despite the yellowed paper. "To my great-niece, Sloane Mitchell. If you're reading this, I've finally run out of time. Your grandfather chose a different path from mine, the right one, building a life and family. My path led elsewhere to secrets and shadows. But blood is blood, and some responsibilities transcend generations. On the property you've inherited, there's something of great value. Not money, something far more important. Something that powerful men have tried to bury. Your grandfather told me you inherited the Mitchell mechanical touch and served your country honorably. You'll need both those qualities for what comes next. Trust no one who offers to buy this land. Whatever you find belongs to history, not to those who would exploit it. Samuel knows more. He's been watching over it all these years. I'm sorry to place this burden on you, but some treasures choose their guardians. You're a Mitchell. You'll know what to do. Theodoric Mitchell, Technical Sergeant, USAAF retiring." Sloane read it 3 times, the words simultaneously revealing nothing and everything. She folded the paper carefully, mind racing with possibilities. The shop's deadline loomed, but this cryptic inheritance beckoned with something beyond mere financial salvation. The bank would wait another day. She had a property to inspect. Harrison Wells found her the next morning as she was loading her truck. Max already settled in the passenger seat. The developer's Italian loafers looked absurdly out of place on the oil-stained concrete, his tailored suit a stark contrast to Sloane's worn canvas jacket and cargo pants. His silver Tesla gleamed beside her rust-flecked Ford pickup. He didn't offer to shake hands, just assessed her with the practiced eye of someone who calculated human value like real estate appreciation. Ms. Mitchell, Harrison Wells Piedmont Development Group. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I understand you've recently acquired some mountain property. I'd like to make you an offer. Sloane continued securing a toolbox in the truck bed. Not for sale. Wells produced a business card between manicured fingers. I don't think you understand the opportunity here. That land has been sitting vacant for decades. No utilities, no access road worth mentioning. I'm prepared to offer $300,000 cash, no questions asked. The amount made her breath catch, more than enough to save the shop and clear all debts, with plenty left over, for a worthless piece of mountain land that she'd never seen. Her great-uncle's warning echoed, trust no one who offers to buy this land. Wells misread her hesitation as negotiation. Fine, $350, but that's my final offer. I have plans for that area, Ms. Mitchell. Development is coming whether you sell to me or not. Sloane closed the truck's tailgate with a decisive thud. When I want to sell, I'll call you. His professional veneer slipped just for a moment. Look, grease monkey, I'm trying to do you a favor. That land is worth nothing to someone like you. The dismissal in his voice triggered something primal in her chest. She'd heard that tone before from officers who thought a female mechanic couldn't possibly understand engines, from bankers who saw her calloused hands and made assumptions about her intelligence. Someone like me, a small-town mechanic with a failing business. What exactly do you plan to do with mountain wilderness? Fix it up? He laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. My offer expires in 48 hours. After that, you're on your own. Wells left a faint trail of expensive cologne as he returned to his Tesla, the electric vehicle pulling away with an almost ghostly silence that seemed at odds with the threat that lingered in the air. Sloane watched until the car disappeared around the corner, then glanced down at the business card still in her hand. On impulse, she pulled out her phone and searched Harrison Wells Piedmont Development. Multiple results appeared: Charity Gala's business profiles, real estate announcements. But one link from 3 years earlier caught her eye. Former intelligence officer launches successful development firm. The article was brief but revealing. Wells had served 20 years in military intelligence before entering private business with remarkable success. The kind of success that suggested connections and knowledge not available to ordinary citizens. Sloane slipped her phone back into her pocket, her decision crystallizing. She was definitely visiting that property now. The drive into the mountains took nearly 4 hours, the last 30 minutes on roads that deteriorated from paved to gravel to little more than twin ruts cutting through dense forest. Her truck groaned in protest as she navigated around potholes and overexposed roots. Max watched the passing wilderness with alert interest, his nose occasionally twitching at scents that filtered through the cracked window. The GPS lost signal 15 minutes before the hand-drawn map from Reeves indicated she should arrive. Ancient oaks and towering pines pressed close to the narrow track branches, occasionally scraping against the truck's sides like skeletal fingers. The forest had a weight to it, a presence that made Sloane acutely aware she was entering somewhere deliberately remote. When the track finally widened into a small clearing, Sloane cut the engine and sat in sudden silence. A cabin stood before her, its weathered logs and stone chimney suggesting it had been there long before her great-uncle acquired the property. Someone had maintained it. The roof appeared sound. The small porch swept clean, a cord of firewood neatly stacked against the side. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the mild spring day. Max whined softly, his body tense with alertness rather than fear. Sloane checked her sidearm out of habit, the Beretta M9 she'd carried since deployment, maintained with the same precision as her grandfather's tools. Easy boy, let's see who's been expecting us. The cabin door opened before they reached it. The man who emerged moved with the deliberate care of advanced age, but his posture remained military straight, his eyes sharp beneath bushy white brows. He leaned on a hand-carved walking stick, his other hand remaining conspicuously near his waistband. Theodoric said you'd have the Mitchell eyes. His voice had the textured quality of aged bourbon, deep and weathered by time. Been waiting a long time for a Mitchell to come up this mountain. Sloan stopped at the base of the porch steps. You, Samuel. The old man nodded once. Samuel Garrett Sargent, United States Army Air Forces, 1943 to 1947. Then other assignments not worth mentioning. He nodded toward Max, who had positioned himself protectively at Sloan's side. Good dog, knows his job. You knew my great-uncle? Knew him. Samuel's laugh held more gravel than humor. Flew with him, fought with him, kept his secrets for 80 years. He gestured toward the cabin door. Coffee's hot. You've come a long way for answers, Sloan Mitchell. But the real question is whether you're ready for them. The cabin's interior smelled of wood smoke and coffee with undertones of gun oil and old books. A single room served as kitchen, living area, and study, with a narrow staircase leading to what Sloan presumed was a sleeping loft. The furnishings were sparse but purposeful, a heavy oak table with 4 chairs, a worn leather armchair beside the stone fireplace, shelves lined with books on aviation history and engineering. What caught Sloan's attention, however, was the wall opposite the fireplace. Maps covered every inch, topographical surveys, aerial photographs, hand-drawn diagrams all focused on the surrounding forest. Red pins marked locations in seemingly random patterns connected by string in an intricate web. At the center, a faded black and white photograph of an aircraft unlike any Sloan had seen before. Samuel tracked her gaze as he poured coffee into tin mugs. Theodoric's life work. Mapping everything, making sure it stayed hidden until the right time. What stayed hidden? The old man handed her a mug, the coffee black and strong enough to strip paint. They come back every few years. Men in dark vehicles with equipment and cameras. They search for a day or two, then leave, getting older each time, less certain about what they're looking for. He settled into the armchair with a soft grunt of discomfort. Government men, but not all the same department. Some military, some not. They never find what they're looking for because they don't know exactly where to look. Theodoric and I made sure of that. Max had settled by the fireplace, but his attention remained fixed on Samuel, as if assessing whether this stranger represented a threat to his person. My great-uncle's letter mentioned something valuable on the property. Samuel's eyes narrowed. Did Wells find you already? The question caught Sloan off guard. How do you know about Wells? Harrison Wells, son of Colonel James Wells, who was very interested in your great-uncle's work. Now the son has picked up where his father left off. Samuel took a slow sip of coffee. Theodoric predicted someone would approach you immediately after his death. The timing was deliberate. He waited until certain people were gone, certain documents declassified. Sloan's patience thinned. I have a foreclosure notice on my grandfather's shop. I came here looking for answers, not more mysteries. Your grandfather chose to forget. Samuel's voice softened with something like sympathy. After what happened, he wanted nothing to do with any of it. Changed his name from Mitchell back to the original family name, moved away, started over. Theodoric respected that choice, kept his distance to protect him, to protect you. Protect us from what? Samuel placed his mug on a side table and leaned forward, his eyes suddenly intense. What do you know about Project Starlight? The name meant nothing to Sloan, but something in Samuel's tone raised the hairs on her neck. Never heard of it. Good. That means they kept their word, at least on the official records. He nodded toward the window where afternoon light filtered through the trees. Before dark, I should show you something. But first, he reached beneath the armchair and retrieved a wooden box, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. Theodoric wanted you to have this. Said a mechanic would understand its value. The box contained technical manuals with faded, restricted stamps, a set of unusual tools, unlike standard aircraft equipment, and what appeared to be navigation instruments with markings Sloan didn't recognize. Beneath these lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with diagrams, equations, and dense technical notes in her great-uncle's precise handwriting. Samuel watched her examine the contents. He was the best flight engineer I ever knew. Could hear a problem in an engine before the instrument showed anything wrong. Said you had the same gift. My grandfather taught me everything about engines. Sloan ran her fingers over a diagram showing modifications to what looked like a bomber's navigation system. But I specialized in ground vehicles, not aircraft. An engine is an engine. A system is a system. Samuel pushed himself to his feet with visible effort. We should go now while we have light. Bring your sidearm. These woods keep their secrets close. The forest grew denser as they moved away from the cabin, following a path visible only to Samuel's experienced eye. Max ranged ahead, occasionally stopping to wait for them, his behavior shifting between curious exploration and alert watchfulness. The old man moved with surprising agility despite his age, using his walking stick more for balance on the uneven ground than for support. Your great-uncle bought this land in 1947, used his entire service pay and inheritance. Government thought he was crazy, turning down their job offers to live up here like a hermit. Samuel pushed a branch aside, holding it for Sloane to pass. But he knew what he was doing. These mountains hide things. The Cherokee knew it centuries ago, places where the world feels thin, where things can be lost or found depending on who's looking. Sloane kept pace easily, her military training and years of physical labor making the hike manageable despite the challenging terrain. You still haven't told me what we're looking for. Not looking, finding, big difference. Samuel paused at a moss-covered rock formation, orienting himself before changing direction slightly. I've walked this path twice a month for 70 years, even when the snow was waist-deep or the summer so hot it shimmered. Theodoric did the same until his health failed. We were sentinels, though nobody asked us to be. They walked for another 20 minutes before Samuel stopped so abruptly that Sloane nearly collided with him. Ahead, Max had frozen, his body rigid with alertness, ears forward, tail straight. The dog gave a single low bark, a sound Sloane had never heard from him before. Samuel nodded as if the dog had confirmed something. He senses it. Animals always do. He pointed with his walking stick to what appeared to be an impenetrable wall of vegetation, vines, branches, and undergrowth tangled together. Most people would walk right past. Their eyes would slide over it, telling them there's nothing interesting here. But your dog knows better. Sloane studied the vegetation barrier. At first glance, it seemed natural, just another dense patch in an already thick forest. But as she looked closer, she noticed subtle patterns in the growth places where vines had been deliberately trained, where branches had been woven together decades ago, and nature had continued the concealment. Someone made this, she said, moving closer. Samuel's voice took on a reverent quality. Your great-uncle and I, year after year, tending it, making sure it stayed hidden, but could still be found by someone who knew what to look for. He reached out with gnarled fingers to touch a particular vine. Nature is the best keeper of secrets if you help her along. Max whined again, moving toward the barrier, and then looking back at Sloane expectantly. She approached the wall of vegetation, examining it with a mechanic's eye for structure and design. There was something deliberate about the way certain thicker vines created a frame, how the growth was densest at eye level but thinner near the ground. Samuel watched her analysis with approval. Theodoric said you'd see it. Mitchell eyes. Sloane crouched, noting a subtle opening near the ground, partially obscured by ferns. Is this the way? In one of them. We created several access points in case we needed to reach it quickly. This one's best for first-timers. Samuel leaned heavily on his walking stick. I'll wait here. This moment belongs to you, Mitchell, finding Mitchell's work. Take your dog. He'll let you know if anyone else is around. Sloane hesitated. What exactly am I going to find in there? The old man's eyes reflected decades of kept secrets. The reason men like Wells would pay any price for this land. The reason your great-uncle lived as a hermit instead of taking government jobs that would have made him rich. The reason some histories never made it into books. He nodded toward the opening. Some questions can only be answered by seeing with your own eyes. Max had already begun to push through the narrow opening, his body wriggling beneath the vegetation with determined purpose. Sloane checked her sidearm again, more from habit than any specific threat, then dropped to her knees and followed the dog into the darkness beyond. The passage was tight but navigable, the ground beneath her palms damp and cool. Roots brushed against her back as she crawled forward, following the sound of Max's movement ahead. After about 15 feet, the space suddenly opened, allowing her to stand. What she saw as her eyes adjusted to the dimmer light stole her breath. They stood in a ravine, its steep walls rising 30 feet on either side, creating a natural enclosure, perhaps 100 yards long and 50 wide. The space felt primordial, untouched, with a small stream trickling along one edge, feeding a stagnant pool at the far end. But it wasn't the ravine itself that caused Sloane's heart to hammer against her ribs. It was what rested within it. The aircraft lay partially submerged in the stagnant pool, its massive form incongruous among the ferns and moss that had colonized its surface over decades. Despite the extensive camouflage of vegetation and accumulated debris, the fundamental shape was unmistakable to anyone with mechanical knowledge. A modified C-87 Liberator expressed the cargo variant of the B-24 bomber that had helped win the Pacific War. But this was no ordinary transport. Even from a distance, Sloan could see extensive modifications to the airframe, additional antenna arrays that defied standard configurations, and structural alterations that suggested specialized equipment had once filled its cargo bay. The nose section remained largely intact, the cockpit glass shattered but still in place. One wing had partially separated during what appeared to be a controlled crash landing, but the overall structure had survived remarkably well, protected by the ravine's natural shelter from extreme weather. Max approached the wreckage, cautiously sniffing at the moss-covered metal as if determining whether it represented a threat. Sloan followed more slowly, her mind processing the implications of what she was seeing. An undocumented military aircraft, deliberately hidden on private property for decades, maintained in secrecy by her own blood relative. The foreclosure notice in her pocket suddenly seemed trivial compared to the historical magnitude before her. She circled the aircraft's perimeter, assessing it with a mechanic's practiced eye. The landing had been skillful despite the difficult terrain, not a catastrophic failure but a deliberate, controlled descent into this hidden ravine. Someone had wanted this plane to remain intact, had chosen this location specifically for its natural concealment. The fuselage bore no standard military markings, no squadron insignia, no identification numbers. Even the distinctive star and bar of American military aircraft had been methodically removed or painted over. This wasn't just an aircraft, it was a ghost deliberately erased from official record. One section of the fuselage had been torn open on impact, creating an access point near what would have been the crew compartment. Vegetation had grown over and through this opening, nature slowly reclaiming the man-made intrusion, but it remained passable. Sloan approached carefully, testing the metal's stability before pulling herself up and into the aircraft's interior. The smell hit her immediately, metal and stagnant water, mildew and decay. But beneath it, something else. The lingering ghost of aviation fuel and oil, the mechanical essence that spoke to her trained senses. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing an interior frozen in time. The cockpit remained largely intact, instrument panels still in place, though corroded and damaged by decades of exposure. The pilot and co-pilot seats had rotted to their metal frames, but the essential layout was preserved except for significant modifications Sloan immediately recognized as non-standard. Additional control panels had been installed, their purposes unclear, but their craftsmanship exceptional. Someone had custom-built this cockpit for a very specific purpose. She moved deeper into the fuselage, where the standard troop transport configuration had been completely replaced by what appeared to be a technical operations center. Metal racks that once held sophisticated equipment lined both sides, though most of the actual devices had been removed or destroyed by impact. Brackets and power connections suggested electronic systems far more advanced than typical for World War II aircraft. Max's bark echoed through the metal chamber, startling Sloan. The dog stood near what had once been the navigator's station, pawing insistently at a section of flooring that had buckled during the crash. His behavior was focused, intentional, the same alertness he showed when he sensed something important. Sloan crouched beside him, examining the area. The metal flooring had been deformed by impact but not broken through. It seemed different from surrounding panels, slightly thicker with subtle reinforcement, suggesting it had been designed to protect something beneath. A compartment, perhaps hidden within the aircraft structure. "What did you find, buddy?" She ran her hands over the metal, feeling for seams or access points. Her fingers found a recessed edge, almost invisible beneath decades of grime. Not damage from the crash, a deliberate access panel disguised to blend with the surrounding flooring. With no proper tools at hand, Sloan examined the nearby debris until she found a piece of metal that could serve as a makeshift pry bar. She wedged it into the nearly invisible seam and applied steady pressure, using mechanic's intuition to find the right angle and force. After a moment of resistance, the panel shifted slightly with a grinding protest of long frozen metal. Max whined with excitement as Sloan worked the panel free, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Unlike the rest of the aircraft, this space had been sealed against the elements, protected from the worst effects of time and weather. Inside lay a military footlocker secured with a padlock that had succumbed to corrosion despite the compartment's protection. The footlocker bore a name stenciled in faded white paint: Lieutenant Levi K. Hawthorne. The lock broke easily in Sloane's hands, decades of oxidation having weakened the metal beyond usefulness. She lifted the lid carefully, half expecting the contents to have rotted away despite the compartment's protection. Instead, she found a collection of items meticulously wrapped in oilskin, preserved with deliberate care by someone who intended them to survive. The first package contained a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact, filled with neat handwriting, alternating between technical notes and personal reflections. Dog tags on a tarnished chain bore the same name as the footlocker: Hawthorne Levi K. O. 7392 Win 4 Catholic. A stack of photographs showed men in uniform standing before various aircraft, including one that appeared to be this very plane before its crash landing. Most intriguing were the technical documents, schematics for equipment Sloane didn't recognize, calculations and diagrams annotated with notes about signal propagation and navigational disruption. One folder bore a faded red stamp: Project Starlight, Top Secret, Eyes Only. She opened the journal to its final entries, the handwriting becoming more hurried and irregular toward the end. December 2nd, 1944. Rain hasn't stopped in 3 days. Engine 3 coughing intermittently. Morrison says the new system is malfunctioning. I believe it's the weather interfering with calibration. We're not on any official flight path. Navigator says he has no idea where we are anymore. December 3rd. Something's wrong. Our coordinates make no sense. We appear to be flying in circles, but instruments show forward progress. Command won't tell us our destination, just that we can't return to base until tests are complete. December 4th, Mitchell discovered the truth. The system was never meant for what they told us. Not navigation weapon. They're going to weaponize it. Can't let that happen. Made decision with crew. Better lost than used this way. December 5th. Found coordinates for remote location. Mountains will hide it. Mitchell knows someone who can help afterward. Removed all identification markers. Disabled radio. We're going dark. Final entry. Tell Mary I didn't run. I flew until I couldn't. A loose page fell from the back of the journal. A photograph of a smiling man in a flight jacket, arm around a young woman holding an infant, standing before a farmhouse. Written on the back: Mary and Sarah, 1943, come home soon. Well, Sloane sat back on her heels, the full weight of what she'd discovered settling over her. This wasn't just a crashed plane. It was a deliberate act, pilots and crew choosing to disappear their aircraft rather than complete whatever mission they'd been assigned. And her great-uncle had been part of it, had spent his life ensuring this secret remained protected. Max's sudden growl pulled her from these thoughts. The dog had moved to the opening in the fuselage, his body rigid with alertness, ears forward, hackles raised. Outside, voices carried through the ravine, multiple people approaching with the methodical movement of professionals rather than hikers. Heat signature confirms. Structure approximately 40 meters ahead. Perimeter secure. No vehicle tracks except target's truck at the cabin. Motion detected inside the structure. Proceed with caution. Military precision, government operators, looking for exactly what she'd found. Sloane quickly rewrapped the journal and documents, securing them in her jacket along with the dog tags. The footlocker would have to remain too large to move quickly, and the approaching team would certainly discover the aircraft regardless. What mattered were the contents, the evidence of what Project Starlight truly was, and why this crew had chosen to bury it. Max remained at the opening, his low growl a continuous warning. Sloane joined him, peering carefully through the vegetation that had grown over the torn fuselage. 4 men in dark tactical clothing moved through the ravine with professional efficiency, each carrying sidearms and what appeared to be scanning equipment. Not military uniforms, but the formation and movement betrayed military training. She had 2 options: confront them directly with questions she had no authority to ask, or retreat with the evidence and determine her next move from safety. The decision made itself. Max had already begun moving toward the far end of the fuselage, away from the approaching team, his instincts once again guiding them toward the best escape route. Sloane followed, moving silently through the aircraft toward what would have been the rear exit ramp. Years of climbing over and under vehicles in her grandfather's shop made navigating the tilted, debris-strewn interior manageable despite the poor light. She reached a point where the fuselage had partially separated from the impact, creating a narrow gap just large enough to slip through. Outside again, she pressed herself against the moss-covered metal, listening. The team had reached the main breach in the fuselage and was preparing to enter. Their voices carried clearly in the ravine's acoustics. Confirm Starlight configuration. Matches the technical description. Check for documentation or equipment. Primary objective is the navigation core. Sir, scans show the security compartment has been accessed recently. Find it. Anything inside belongs to the project. Sloane eased away from the aircraft, using its bulk as cover, while she and Max moved toward the ravine wall. The vegetation was thick enough to provide concealment if they moved carefully, and the team's focus on the aircraft gave them a narrow window to retreat unnoticed. The climb up the ravine wall was treacherous, loose soil and roots that threatened to give way with each handhold. Max scrambled ahead with canine agility, finding the most stable path through instinct and physical ability. Sloane followed his route, grateful for the strength built through years of lifting engines and wrestling with stubborn bolts. At the ravine's edge, she paused to catch her breath and listen. The team had discovered the empty footlocker, voices raised in frustration echoed from the aircraft. They would search the surrounding area next. She needed to move quickly. Instead of returning through the hidden passage, Sloane and Max circled above the ravine, using the dense forest canopy for cover. The route was longer but would avoid any team members potentially stationed near the entrance. Her mind raced with implications, while her body navigated automatically, military training taking over when conscious thought became too overwhelmed. An experimental aircraft with technology so sensitive that its own crew chose to crash it rather than complete their mission. Her great-uncle spending decades as caretaker of this secret. Harrison Wells, former intelligence officer, suddenly offering excessive money for seemingly worthless land. The government team's immediate appearance after her arrival. Everything connected to something called Project Starlight, something valuable enough that people still search for it 80 years later. She found Samuel exactly where she'd left him, though his posture had changed. He stood straighter, more alert, his walking stick now held like a weapon rather than a support. When he saw her emerge from the forest, his expression revealed no surprise, only grim confirmation. They found you. Not a question. Sloane nodded, catching her breath. 4 men, tactical gear, scanning equipment. Looking for something called the navigation core. Said everything belongs to the project. Samuel's weathered face hardened. They always said that it belonged to them. Convenient how they forget it was Hawthorne who designed it, Mitchell who built it, Morrison who programmed it, until they wanted to turn it into something else. He nodded toward the cabin. We don't have much time. They'll check the cabin next. What is Project Starlight? What did my great-uncle help build? The old man began moving with surprising speed despite his age, forcing Sloane to keep pace. Something that could have changed everything. Navigation system that could function without external reference points, could find a target anywhere on Earth with unprecedented accuracy, would have saved thousands of lives if used as intended. His voice tightened. Until some general realized you could reverse the principle. Instead of finding your own location, you could disrupt someone else's navigation. Blind every compass, every instrument from Haven within a 100-mile radius. In 1904, that meant ships running aground, planes flying in circles until they crashed. They wanted to weaponize a navigation system, the ultimate electronic weapon of its time. Hawthorne and your great-uncle designed it to save pilots, bring them home safely. The military saw it as a way to make sure the enemy never found their way home at all. Samuel's pace increased as they approached the cabin. Hawthorne made the call. Mitchell backed him. They took the plane down here, where the mountains would shield the signal, where they could hide it until the war ended. They thought after victory, cooler heads would prevail. They reached the cabin as the afternoon light began to fade, long shadows stretching between the trees. Samuel went directly to the wall of maps, pulling down the central photograph of the aircraft. Behind it, a small wall safe appeared, its combination lock well maintained despite its age. But cooler heads didn't prevail, Sloane said, watching as he worked the dial with practiced precision. The Cold War began. Suddenly, Starlight became even more valuable, a way to disable Soviet navigation, to protect American airspace from bomber incursions. The project continued under different names, different departments. But they never recreated what Hawthorne and Mitchell built. The safe swung open and revealing a slim metal case, because they hid the key component. the navigation core. Samuel removed the case and placed it on the table, his hands almost reverent. Your great-uncle and Hawthorne split up after the crash. Hawthorne took his family and disappeared under a new identity. Mitchell stayed to watch over the aircraft to make sure no one found it until the right time. He looked up at Sloan, his eyes filled with the weight of decades. They both believed someday the technology could fulfill its original purpose, saving lives, not taking them, but only when the world was ready. Sloan placed the documents she'd recovered on the table beside the case. Wells knows about this. His father was involved somehow. Colonel James Wells, military intelligence, led 3 recovery attempts in the 1950s. His son picked up the family obsession, realized Theodoric's death meant the protection had passed to someone new. Samuel's hands rested on the metal case without opening it. They've always wanted what's in here, the core component that made Starlight work. Theodoric kept it separate from the aircraft, knew they'd find the plane eventually. Outside, the sound of vehicles approaching cut through the forest quiet, multiple engines moving with purpose up the narrow access road. Samuel didn't react with surprise or fear, only resignation. Right on schedule, they're nothing if not predictable. He pushed the case towards Sloan. This belongs to a Mitchell now. Your great-uncle believed you'd know what to do with it when the time came, whether to destroy it forever or reveal it to the world. Max moved to the window, his posture alert but not aggressive. Sloan joined him, peering through the weathered glass to see 3 black SUVs approaching the clearing, their government plates partially obscured by mud. The same tactical team from the ravine, plus additional personnel, moving with the confidence of people accustomed to authority without question. Samuel appeared beside her, his expression hardened by decades of standing guard. These men represent power, not justice. They think ownership comes from authority rather than creation. He nodded toward her pack where she'd stored the journal and documents. Those prove otherwise. Hawthorne's words, Mitchell's work, the true history they tried to bury. The vehicle stopped in a practiced formation that blocked any potential escape by car. Men emerged with the coordinated efficiency of those who had performed similar operations many times before. Their leader, distinguished by his more formal attire despite the tactical setting, surveyed the cabin with cold calculation. Harrison Wells, Samuel muttered, following his father's footsteps right to our door. Sloan's mind raced through options, each seemingly worse than the last. Running meant abandoning her great-uncle's legacy. Staying meant confronting government operators with unknown authority. Either way, the shop, the foreclosure, all of it paled compared to the historical magnitude of what she'd discovered. Samuel turned to her, his weathered face set with determination that belied his years. Your great-uncle said when this day came, you'd face a choice no Mitchell should have to make alone. That's why he left you the letter, the land. He believed in you before he ever met you. Through the window, Wells approached the cabin with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. 4 operators flanked him, hands near holstered weapons, their posture making clear this wasn't a social call. Sloan felt the weight of the dog tags in her pocket, the journal's pages against her side. In the ravine, she'd read a pilot's final decision, choosing principle over orders, conscience over career. Now she understood why her great-uncle had chosen her a mechanic with military service, someone who understood both duty and dissent. Samuel watched her expression with knowing eyes. Mitchell blood runs true. You already know what you're going to do. The knock at the door came with the sharp authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. Max moved to Sloan's side, his body pressed against her leg in silent solidarity. The metal case sat on the table containing technology that had been worth hiding for 80 years. Sloan Mitchell straightened her shoulders, the foreclosure notice in her pocket suddenly insignificant compared to the choice before her. Her grandfather had chosen to walk away from this legacy. Her great-uncle had chosen to protect it. Now the decision passed to her, the last Mitchell standing between history and those who would rewrite it. Samuel nodded once, a gesture of respect from one sentinel to another. They always underestimate mechanics, people who understand how things work, people who can see beneath the surface to the truth of how things are built and how they can be unmade. The knocking came again, more insistent. Voices outside grew impatient with command. Time had run out for contemplation. The moment demanded action. Sloan reached for her great-uncle's journal, the tangible record of Project Starlight's true purpose and the courage of those who had sacrificed to protect it. Whatever came next would be her choice, her continuation of a legacy she hadn't known existed until today. The shop might be lost, but something far more valuable had been found: truth. Buried in a Georgia forest waiting for the right hands to uncover it. The door hinges creaked as the first blow struck from outside. Max growled a low rumble of protective instinct. Samuel stood his ground beside the table, decades of vigilance culminating in this moment of transition. And Sloan Mitchell, grease-stained mechanic and reluctant heir to a classified legacy, made her decision. Some treasures weren't meant to stay buried forever. Some truths demanded to be heard, regardless of who tried to silence them. Her great-uncle had known that. Now so did she. The door burst open to Harrison Wells's command, flooding the cabin with the harsh beams of tactical flashlights. Behind them, all the forest kept its secrets, as it had for 80 years. But secrets, like engines, eventually revealed themselves to those who knew how to listen. The cabin door splintered inward, with military precision, tactical flashlights cutting through the dim interior. Harrison Wells stepped through the threshold, flanked by operatives whose body language conveyed both government authority and private contractor autonomy. Their tactical gear bore no insignia, their weapons standard, but without identifying markings, the unmistakable signature of deniable operations. Wells surveyed the cabin with the practiced assessment of someone locating assets rather than people. His gaze passed over Samuel briefly before fixing on Sloan, noting the protective stance of her dog and the tension in her shoulders. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell, seems you've been busy since our chat at your shop." Sloan positioned herself between the intruders and the table where the metal case rested. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Wells gestured casually, and his team spread through the cabin's interior, securing exits and scanning for threats with professional efficiency. "Actually, this property has been under federal monitoring since 1947. Your inheritance comes with certain national security exceptions to standard property rights." He pulled a document from his jacket. "This is a matter of classified technology developed under military contract. All related materials fall under Section 14 of the Defense Production Act." Samuel's weathered hand gripped his walking stick, tighter knuckles whitening with strain. "Still hiding behind paperwork just like your father. Some things never change, even across generations." The recognition in Wells' expression confirmed Samuel's accusation. "Sergeant Garrett, still the loyal guard dog, I see. My father mentioned you often, the stubborn enlisted man who refused to understand the bigger picture." "I understood the picture perfectly. Just didn't like the frame you put it in." Wells turned his attention back to Sloan. "Ms. Mitchell, I'll be direct. You've stumbled into something with significant national security implications. The aircraft you discovered and any related technology or documentation are classified government property. I'm authorized to offer generous compensation for your cooperation, enough to save your grandfather's shop and secure your future." Sloan felt the weight of Hawthorne's journal against her side, the metal case on the table behind her, suddenly heavy with historical significance. Seems strange the government would offer money for something they claim already belongs to them. A flash of irritation crossed Wells' face, quickly masked by professional composure. "Let's call it compensation for your inconvenience. $500,000 tax-free in exchange for all materials related to Project Starlight and your signed non-disclosure agreement." He nodded toward the tactical team, documenting the cabin's contents. "Or we simply confiscate everything under national security provisions, and you return to your failing business with nothing but a warning about interfering in classified matters." The crude arithmetic of the situation wasn't lost on Sloan. Her grandfather's shop versus a decades-old secret. Financial security versus historical truth. Yet something in Wells' eagerness in the private contractors, rather than official military personnel, suggested this wasn't simply about national security. Men like Wells didn't build development empires on government salaries alone. Samuel shifted closer to Sloan, his voice low but firm. "They've been offering blood money for 80 years. Your great-uncle turned them down every time. So did Hawthorne until the day he died." Wells' expression hardened. "Sergeant Garrett has a romantic view of history. The reality is that Starlight was military technology developed in wartime. Your great-uncle and Lieutenant Hawthorne committed serious offenses by concealing it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to exclude his team. "But we can let the past remain buried. Take the money, sign the papers, walk away." Max growled softly, sensing the tension escalating. Sloane rested her hand on his head, steadying both the dog and herself. The journal in her pocket seemed to burn against her side, filled with the truth of what had actually happened. The weaponization of a navigation system against its creator's wishes, the principled stand of men who refused to let their invention become something monstrous. One of the tactical team members approached Wells, speaking in professional shorthand. "Sir, aircraft confirmed. Condition matches parameters. Compartment breached. Contents removed." Wells nodded without shifting his attention from Sloane. "Ms. Mitchell, I believe you have materials belonging to the project. Documents, possibly equipment. I'm giving you one opportunity to hand them over voluntarily." Sloane weighed her options, measuring the tactical team's positions against the cabin's exits. Running wasn't viable. Fighting was suicidal, but surrender meant betraying her great-uncle's legacy, betraying the truth these men had spent decades trying to bury. Samuel's steady presence beside her provided an unexpected clarity. Here was a man who had kept faith for 70 years, who understood that some principles transcended immediate threats. The answer crystallized with mechanical precision. When you can't win by force, you change the battlefield entirely. Sloane took a deliberate step back, placing her hand on the metal case. "I have conditions." Wells' eyebrow lifted slightly, the only acknowledgement of his surprise. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "I'm in exactly the right position. I have what you want, and I understand exactly what it is." She tapped the case. "The navigation core. The component your father spent decades searching for, the reason you're here, with private contractors instead of official military personnel. I'm guessing whatever's in this case is still valuable, not just historically, but technologically." The slight tension in Wells's jaw confirmed her assessment. "The technology is obsolete. And then why are you so desperate to recover it? Why offer $500,000 for obsolete equipment?" Sloane maintained steady eye contact, falling back on the same unwavering resolve that had served her in Afghanistan when superior officers questioned her mechanical assessments. "Here's my condition," Dr. Evelyn Reed, the military aviation historian. "I want her to document everything before anything leaves this property." Wells' laugh held genuine amusement. "You want a historian to examine classified technology? That's not how this works. It's exactly how this works if you want my cooperation. Otherwise, good luck finding what else might be hidden on 170 acres of mountain wilderness." Sloane nodded towards Samuel. "My great-uncle and Sergeant Garrett had 70 years to prepare contingencies. You think everything important is sitting on this table?" The calculated bluff hung in the air between them. Wells studied her with narrowed eyes, reassessing her from obstacle to adversary. One of his team whispered something in his ear, likely advising against negotiation, but Wells silenced them with a slight gesture. "Reed has no security clearance for this material. She has published extensively on classified aviation projects. You can have her sign whatever paperwork you need." Sloane pressed her advantage. "I'm not asking to make this public. I'm asking for proper historical documentation before everything disappears into some government warehouse." Samuel's weathered face betrayed the ghost of a smile, recognition of a strategy that echoed decisions made decades earlier by another Mitchell. The tension in the cabin shifted, power rebalancing, as Wells considered options beyond simple confiscation. After a calculated pause, Wells nodded curtly. "One historian, 48 hours. Everything remains under our supervision and subject to classification review." He pointed to the case on the table. "That comes with us now, non-negotiable." Sloane kept her hand firmly on the case. "It stays until Dr. Reed examines it. That's the deal." Wells' jaw tightened, but something in his expression suggested reluctant respect for her resolve. "You have 24 hours to produce Dr. Reed. My team stays on site. Nothing leaves this property." He turned to his operatives. "Secure the perimeter. Full containment protocol." As the tactical team redistributed to establish the control of the property, Wells paused at the door. "Your great-uncle was stubborn too. It cost him everything: career, family, future. Consider whether his choices are worth emulating before you commit to this path." When Wells and his immediate security detail had exited, leaving 2 operatives posted inside the cabin, Samuel eased himself into his armchair with the weariness of a marathon runner who had finally glimpsed the finish line. "Theodoric would be proud. You bought us time, the most valuable commodity in any war." Sloan kept her expression neutral, aware of the watching operatives. 24 hours isn't much time to reach Dr. Reed. Samuel's eyes conveyed what his words couldn't. That time wasn't the objective. Something else was in motion, something planned decades ago for exactly this scenario. Enough time for what matters. The Reed woman's contact information is in Theodoric's papers, the ones in the box you found. The tactical team had established a perimeter around the cabin communication equipment, deployed with practiced efficiency. Through the window, Sloan could see Wells on a satellite phone, his posture suggesting he was reporting to someone with sufficient authority to question his decisions. The politics behind this operation suddenly seemed more complex than simple historical classification. One of the operatives stationed inside approached his manner professional but not overtly hostile. Ms. Mitchell, we need to secure any project-related materials in your possession. Documentation, personal effects from the aircraft, anything you remove from the site. Sloan removed Hawthorne's journal and dog tags from her jacket, surrendering them with reluctance born of both principle and strategy. The operative cataloged them efficiently, placing them in an evidence bag with a digital tag. The material evidence was now in their possession, but the knowledge she'd gained from reading Hawthorne's words remained her own. The navigation system's original humanitarian purpose, the crew's ethical stand against weaponization, her great-uncle's role in preserving both the technology and the truth. Samuel watched the proceedings with the stoic expression of someone who had witnessed this dance before, perhaps multiple times across decades. When the operative returned to his post, the old man's voice dropped to a near whisper. Remember what matters most. Not the hardware, not the papers. The truth of what they tried to build and why they chose to hide it. The hours that followed established an uneasy détente. Wells's team secured the aircraft site in the ravine, setting up equipment to prevent unauthorized access and prepare for eventual extraction. The cabin became an impromptu command post with Sloan and Samuel effectively under house arrest, while maintaining the pretense of cooperative negotiation. Using the satellite communication equipment Wells' team had established, Sloan placed a call to Dr. Evelyn Reed's office at Northwestern University. The conversation was necessarily guarded, conducted under the watchful eyes of Wells's operatives, but the historian's immediate recognition of Project Starlight confirmed Samuel's assessment of her expertise. Dr. Reed, I've discovered materials related to an undocumented aircraft from 1944, possibly connected to experimental navigation systems. Sloan chose her words carefully, aware of the monitoring. The government has expressed interest in securing these materials, but I've requested your presence as an independent historical documentarian. The pause on the line suggested Dr. Reed understood the subtext perfectly. Ms. Mitchell, I've spent 15 years researching classified aviation projects from that era. Project Starlight has been particularly elusive, more rumor than documented history. If you've found physical evidence, her voice conveyed professional excitement, carefully restrained. I can be there tomorrow morning. Send the coordinates. Wells approved the arrangement with evident reluctance, dispatching a team member to meet Dr. Reed at the nearest regional airport. The historian's arrival would start the 24-hour clock on documentation before the government claimed everything, assuming Wells honored the agreement at all. As evening approached, the cabin settled into tense silence. Samuel retreated to his armchair, his expression distant, occasionally checking his ancient wristwatch with meaningful glances toward Sloan. The posted guards maintained professional vigilance, rotating shifts with military precision despite their private contractor status. Under the pretense of caring for Max, Sloan took the dog outside for a brief, supervised walk within the perimeter established by Wells's team. The forest had transformed from peaceful wilderness to occupied territory, tactical equipment positioned at strategic intervals, communications gear humming with encrypted exchanges. Her inheritance had become a battlefield where historical truth faced off against official secrecy, with her squarely in the middle. Max's behavior shifted subtly as they moved along the perimeter. His attention repeatedly drawn to the northern edge of the property, ears perked towards something beyond human perception. Sloan followed his lead as casually as possible, noting the position relative to the cabin and the ravine where the aircraft lay. Whatever drew the dog's attention remained invisible, but his alertness suggested something or someone moved in the forest beyond the secured area. When they returned to the cabin, Samuel's cryptic expression confirmed her suspicion. The old man's earlier words echoed, Your great-uncle and I had 70 years to prepare contingencies. The waiting game had additional players beyond those visible within the perimeter. Night fell over the mountains, the darkness broken only by the tactical lights positioned around the property. Wells returned to the cabin after overseeing the aircraft site's security, his expression suggesting complications beyond his initial assessment. He approached Sloan with measured steps, his voice pitched for privacy despite the open setting. My team discovered something interesting in the ravine. Secondary excavation points recently disturbed. Care to explain? Sloan maintained neutral composure. I only found what you've already secured. Professional assessment suggests multiple access attempts over decades, almost as if someone was periodically checking the aircraft or removing components. Wells studied her reaction with practiced intensity. Your great-uncle was thorough. Logs found in the aircraft suggest systematic preservation despite intentional concealment. He wasn't just hiding it, he was maintaining it. The revelation aligned with Samuel's oblique references to contingency plans. Theodoric Mitchell hadn't merely abandoned classified technology, he'd preserved it for some future purpose. Perhaps the same purpose that had Dr. Reed en route and Samuel checking his watch with increasing frequency. Wells continued pressing his advantage. The navigation core is only part of the system. My technical team confirms components are missing, specifically the algorithmic encoding mechanisms that made Starlight functional. Where are they, Ms. Mitchell? The genuine question in his voice confirmed what Sloan had begun to suspect. Wells didn't have the complete picture either. He was operating on institutional knowledge, perhaps his father's obsession, but lacked critical information about Starlight's true nature and current status. Samuel's weathered voice cut through the tension. You're asking the wrong questions, just like your father did, always focused on the hardware, never understanding the principle. Wells turned toward the old man, irritation breaking through his professional veneer. The principle was navigation disruption, the ability to blind enemy systems while maintaining our own guidance capabilities. The ultimate electronic countermeasure. That was your principle, not theirs. Samuel straightened in his chair, decades of certainty in his posture. Hawthorne and Mitchell built a system to guide aircraft home safely through any conditions. Your people saw a weapon instead of a shield. The philosophical divide crystallized in that exchange, the eternal tension between creation and weaponization, between innovation's purpose and its potential for destruction. Sloan recognized the same debate that had echoed through her military service technology's dual nature, its capacity for both salvation and annihilation, depending on the hands that controlled it. Wells dismissed Samuel's perspective with a practiced wave. Intentions are irrelevant. Military technology serves national security, not individual idealism. He turned back to Sloan. Dr. Reed arrives tomorrow. I suggest you use the intervening hours to consider your position carefully. Cooperation offers certain benefits. Obstruction has significant consequences. When Wells exited to confer with his team outside, Samuel gestured Sloan closer, his voice barely audible. Midnight, watch Max. The cryptic instruction hung between them as the hours passed, the cabin's atmosphere growing heavier with unspoken tension. The guards maintained their positions professional, but alert to any movement. Wells returned briefly to check security arrangements before retiring to one of the SUVs that now served as mobile command posts. As midnight approached, Samuel's attention fixed on his watch with increasing frequency. Sloan maintained casual movement around the cabin, organizing her pack, checking Max's water bowl, mundane activities that wouldn't trigger the guard's suspicion. The dog's behavior shifted subtly, his attention focusing on something beyond human perception, ears perked toward the forest's edge. The change came not with dramatic suddenness, but with subtle infiltration. The tactical lights outside dimmed almost imperceptibly, the perimeter's electronic hum diminishing by degrees rather than failing outright. The guards' communication devices produced brief static before resuming normal function, the interruption so minor it prompted only cursory equipment checks rather than full alert. Samuel's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes conveyed clear meaning. It's happening. The cabin's ancient landline telephone rang with jarring suddenness, startling even the professional guards. One moved to answer it, listening briefly before extending the receiver toward Sloan. For you, someone named Reed. Sloan accepted the phone with calculated casualness, aware of the guards monitoring every word. Dr. Reed, I thought you were arriving tomorrow. The voice that responded wasn't Dr. Reed's, it was female, but younger with the crisp diction of someone reading from prepared text. Change of plans. Weather system moving in. Need to examine the site immediately. Your great-uncle's documentation mentioned atmospheric interference with the navigation systems. Critical to document under similar conditions. Arriving at northeastern property boundary in 20 minutes. Need escort through security perimeter. The message's subtext was clear, despite its oblique delivery. Whatever contingency Samuel and Theodoric had prepared was activating now, using the pretense of Dr. Reed's arrival as cover. The northeastern boundary exactly where Max had shown interest during their walk. Sloan replaced the receiver, turning to the guards with practiced innocence. Dr. Reed's arriving earlier than expected. Weather concerns. She nodded toward the window where clouds had indeed begun gathering over the mountains. She needs escort from the property line. The senior guard frowned, checking his communication device. No notification from perimeter team. He keyed his radio, attempting to contact Wells, but received only intermittent static. Communications are degrading. Weather interference. Samuel nodded sagely, the perfect picture of an old man unsurprised by mountain conditions. Storm front moving in, plays havoc with radio signals in these valleys. Been that way since I first came up here in '47. The coincidence communications failing just as an unexpected call came through on the landline would have triggered immediate suspicion in normal circumstances. But the degradation had been so gradual, so subtle, that it registered as environmental interference rather than deliberate jamming. Samuel and Theodoric's contingency was unfolding with the precision of long planning, manipulating perception rather than confronting it directly. The senior guard made a tactical decision based on limited information. Jackson escort Ms. Mitchell to meet the historian. Standard security protocols. Full search before entry. I'll try to reach command for verification. Sloan grabbed her jacket, whistling softly for Max to follow. The dog responded with unusual alertness, positioning himself between Sloan and the guard as they exited the cabin. Outside, the tactical perimeter appeared normal at first glance, but closer inspection revealed subtle disruptions, certain sensors, offline communications functioning intermittently, team members repositioning to compensate for equipment issues. The guard led Sloan toward the northeastern property boundary, following the same path she and Max had explored earlier. The dog moved with purposeful certainty, no longer following but leading his behavior, suggesting familiarity with whatever awaited them. The forest seemed to close around them, the darkness between tactical lights growing deeper, the sounds of the mountain night swallowing their footsteps. Halfway to the boundary, Max froze, his posture shifting from alert to alert. The guard reached for his sidearm, scanning the surrounding trees with professional assessment. What's wrong with your dog? Before Sloan could respond, the tactical lights throughout the perimeter dimmed significantly, plunging the forest into near darkness. The guard's radio erupted with urgent chatter, multiple voices reporting equipment failures across the secured area. He keyed his microphone, attempting to report their position, but received only static in response. Max darted forward, suddenly disappearing into the underbrush with purpose rather than panic. Sloan called after him, the concern in her voice genuine rather than performed. The guard hesitated, caught between protocol and the rapidly deteriorating situation, then made a critical error. He focused on his communications equipment rather than his protectee. The moment his attention shifted, Sloan felt a hand grasp her arm, pulling her sideways into the dense vegetation. She instinctively resisted until Max's familiar presence appeared beside her, the dog nudging her forward with urgent insistence. A voice whispered close to her ear. Mitchell sent us. Follow the dog. The forest erupted with controlled chaos as Sloan allowed herself to be guided away from the guard. Tactical teams responded to multiple electronic failures, their disciplined protocols disrupted by systematically degrading equipment. Voices called her name, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness in organized search patterns. But the hands guiding her seemed to anticipate each movement, staying perpetually one step ahead of the search pattern. They moved through the forest with practiced efficiency, following paths invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. Max led with canine certainty, his behavior suggesting prior familiarization with both the route and the strangers now guiding them. After 15 minutes of strategic evasion, they reached a camouflaged vehicle position, two mud-covered jeeps hidden beneath canopy netting, their engines cold but ready. 3 figures awaited them, 2 men and a woman, their clothing nondescript, but their movements suggesting military training. The woman stepped forward, her expression simultaneously professional and compassionate. Elise Hawthorne. My grandfather was Lieutenant Levi Hawthorne. We've been waiting a long time to meet Theodoric Mitchell's heir. The revelation struck Sloan with physical force. Hawthorne's granddaughter mentioned in his final journal entry, now standing before her in the midst of what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated extraction operation. The contingency Samuel had referenced wasn't just about preserving technology, it was about connecting the families who had sacrificed to protect it. Elise continued with urgent efficiency. Your great-uncle and my grandfather established this protocol decades ago. The moment a Mitchell brought someone to the aircraft site, it would trigger the final phase. She gestured toward the waiting vehicles. We need to move. Wells' team is good, but their equipment will continue experiencing technical difficulties for approximately 40 minutes. The deliberate emphasis on technical difficulties suggested more than coincidence, an active countermeasure rather than fortunate timing. Sloan glanced back toward the perimeter where flashlight beams still swept in search patterns. Samuel is still back there. One of the men checked his watch with military precision. Sergeant Garrett knows the timeline. He's played his part for 70 years. This is the endgame he's been waiting for. The realization settled over Sloan. Samuel had never intended to leave. His role was to maintain the diversion, to be the visible keeper, while the true contingency unfolded beyond Wells' perception. The old man had prepared for this moment possibly longer than Sloan had been alive. Elise opened the Jeep's door with urgent purpose. We have what we need from the aircraft already. The navigation core you found is a decoy convincing enough to satisfy Wells temporarily, but not the original. That's been secure for decades. The strategic depth of her great-uncle's planning left Sloan momentarily speechless. The metal case in the cabin, the one Wells coveted and she had bargained with, was deliberate misdirection, a convincing replica to satisfy those who came searching without revealing the genuine article. Max jumped into the Jeep without hesitation, his behavior confirming the orchestrated nature of this extraction. These weren't strangers to the dog. They were continuation of a plan he'd been part of, perhaps trained for during his adoption by Sloan years earlier. Her companion had been more than emotional support. He had been a living component of Theodoric Mitchell's contingency plan. Elise's expression softened with understanding. This is overwhelming, I know, but we've been preparing for this day since before you were born. Your great-uncle knew eventually someone would inherit his responsibility, someone with Mitchell blood and the mechanical intuition to understand what Starlight truly was. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the forest. Quiet Wells's team, expanding their search perimeter, recovering from the electronic disruption faster than anticipated. Elise nodded toward the Jeep with renewed urgency. Now or never, Ms. Mitchell. Stay and face Wells with half the story, or come with us and learn the whole truth. The decision crystallized with mechanical clarity. Wells represented institutional power without ethical foundation. Elise offered historical truth preserved through generational sacrifice. Sloan climbed into the Jeep, Max settling beside her with evident approval. The contingency plan was now in motion, decades of preparation unfolding in real time. As they pulled away, navigating forest paths invisible to satellite surveillance, Elise handed Sloan a leather portfolio. Your great-uncle prepared this for whoever inherited his responsibility. The complete history of Project Starlight, not the military's version, but the truth as documented by those who created it. Sloan opened the portfolio by the Jeep's dim interior light, finding photographs, technical diagrams, and personal correspondence between Theodoric Mitchell and Levi Hawthorne spanning decades. The documents revealed a narrative dramatically different from Wells' portrayal. Starlight hadn't been weaponized navigation disruption, but its opposite, a system designed to guide aircraft safely despite any electronic interference or countermeasures. They designed it to save pilots, Sloan murmured, pieces connecting with mechanical precision. Not to disrupt navigation, but to preserve it against disruption. Elise nodded, her expression reflecting generational knowledge. The ultimate defensive technology, immune to jamming, independent of external reference points. It would have revolutionized aviation safety. Her voice tightened with inherited conviction, until General Marshall realized it could be reversed, turned inside out to become the perfect offensive weapon instead. The convoy moved deeper into the mountains, following routes absent from any official map, the vehicle's specialized suspension handling the rough terrain with military efficiency. Through the window, Sloan watched tactical lights fading in the distance as Wells' search perimeter expanded in the wrong direction, another calculated element of her great-uncle's planning. Elise continued as they drove, filling historical gaps with the practiced efficiency of someone who had carried this narrative her entire life. My grandfather and your great-uncle refused the weaponization order. When threatened with court-martial, they made a decision: fake a crash, hide the technology, preserve the truth, until a time when the innovation could serve its original purpose. The jeeps emerged from dense forest onto a narrow mountain road, invisible from aerial surveillance trees, forming a natural canopy overhead. They followed this hidden route for 20 minutes before turning onto what appeared to be an abandoned mining access road, its entrance concealed by the strategic rockfall and overgrown vegetation. The families maintained contact secretly for decades. Elise explained, the jeep bouncing over the rough terrain. My grandfather changed his name, moved his family to Oregon, became a commercial pilot instructor. Your great-uncle stayed to guard the crash site, maintaining the illusion of a hermit, while coordinating with my family to preserve both the technology and its true history. The mining road terminated at what appeared to be a collapsed tunnel entrance, decades of weathering suggesting abandonment long before Theodoric acquired the property. One of Elise's companions exited the lead jeep, approaching a seemingly random rock formation beside the tunnel. After a series of precise manipulations, a section of the collapsed facade swung inward, revealing a reinforced passage beyond. Welcome to the real Project Starlight, Elise said as they drove into the hidden facility. The aircraft was never the primary objective. It was always about the principles behind the technology and ensuring they wouldn't be corrupted. The tunnel extended 300 yards into the mountain before opening into a cavernous space that defied Sloane's expectations. What appeared from outside as an abandoned mine had been transformed into a sophisticated underground facility, part laboratory, part archive, part museum. Modern equipment coexisted with preserved historical technology, the walls lined with technical diagrams, photographs and timelines documenting Project Starlight's true evolution. At the center stood a glass-enclosed display containing what Sloane immediately recognized as the genuine navigation core, similar to the decoy in Samuel's cabin, but with evident differences in construction and complexity. Surrounding it were working prototypes of various components, meticulously maintained across decades. Elise approached the display with reverent familiarity. This is what Wells is really searching for, not just the hardware, but the mathematical principles behind it. The algorithms that made Starlight fundamentally different from conventional navigation systems. She turned to Sloane with generational purpose. Your great-uncle and my grandfather didn't just hide technology, they preserved its soul, its intended purpose. They believed someday the world would be ready for Starlight as it was meant to be. The facility hummed with quiet activity as Elise's companions activated systems and secured the entrance behind them. Screens displayed the mountain's perimeter security status, confirming Wells' team continued searching in predetermined patterns that bypassed this location entirely. The contingency plan's sophistication became increasingly apparent, generations of preparation for this precise moment. Elise guided Sloane toward a conference area where maps and documents covered a central table. Dr. Evelyn Reed is real and is indeed arriving tomorrow. She's been researching Project Starlight for years, getting close enough to the truth to be useful, but never finding the crucial evidence. She spread photographs across the table showing the historian at various academic conferences. She's our public face, the credible, respected voice who can tell this story without being dismissed as conspiracy theorists. The strategic depth of the plan unfolded before Sloane, using Wells' own agreement against him, bringing in a legitimate historian whose reputation would make her findings difficult to dismiss, while simultaneously securing the most crucial evidence in this hidden facility. Theodoric Mitchell and Levi Hawthorne had created a multi-generational chess game where the final move was only now coming into play. Max settled comfortably in the facility, as if familiar with the environment, further confirming Sloane's suspicion that her companion had been deliberately placed in her life as part of the larger contingency. The dog's training, his specific behaviors around the aircraft, and Samuel, his immediate recognition of Elise, all pointed to orchestration beyond coincidence. One of Elise's companions approached, offering Sloane a tablet, displaying security footage from the cabin. Samuel sat calmly in his armchair, Wells pacing before him with evident frustration. The old sergeant's expression conveyed neither concern nor triumph, simply the patient endurance of someone who had waited decades for this moment. Sergeant Garrett knew this was coming. Elise explained, her voice respectful. He's been preparing for it his entire life. His role was always to be the visible guardian, the one they would watch while the real work happened elsewhere. The hidden facility's sophistication raised obvious questions about resources and maintenance over decades. Sloan gestured toward the modern equipment. How did my great-uncle fund all this? He lived like a hermit. Elise's expression shifted to something between admiration and conspiracy. The official story is that Theodoric Mitchell rejected government employment after the war, living in isolation on mountain property. The reality is more complex. She accessed a computer terminal displaying financial records spanning decades. Your great-uncle established a private engineering consultancy in 1952, working remotely on specialized aviation problems. His solutions were brilliant enough that clients didn't question his reclusiveness. The records revealed a carefully constructed financial infrastructure, modest but steady income, channeled through multiple foundations and trusts, creating resources sufficient to maintain both the facility and the network of individuals committed to preserving Starlight's legacy. My grandfather did something similar. Elise continued, pride evident in her voice. Flight instruction provided his cover, but he quietly consulted on navigation systems throughout his career. Between our families, we maintained everything, the facility, the documentation, the connections necessary to activate when the time came. The strategy's intergenerational nature left Sloan momentarily speechless. Her great-uncle had constructed a decades-long contingency not just for technology, but for truth itself, a parallel historical record preserved against institutional revision, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Elise directed Sloan's attention to a central workstation where technical diagrams displayed Starlight's core principles. This is what matters most, not the physical components, which could be replicated with modern technology, but the mathematical approach. Starlight wasn't built on conventional navigation principles. It utilized quantum relationships we're only beginning to understand today. The technical diagrams confirmed what Hawthorne's journal had suggested. Starlight operated on principles decades ahead of its time, creating self-contained navigation without external reference points. Modern systems like GPS relied on satellite networks. Starlight functioned independently, immune to jamming or interference. The military wanted to weaponize it by reversing the principle, Elise explained, displaying mathematical equations that illustrated the concept. Instead of maintaining navigation despite interference, they wanted to create interference that no conventional system could overcome. The ultimate electronic weapon, selective disruption of enemy navigation while preserving our own. The ethical implications clarified instantly, a defensive technology perverted into offensive capability, innovation twisted against its creator's intentions. Hawthorne and Mitchell's decision to fake the crash represented not treason, but principled resistance against weaponization of humanitarian technology. Sloan studied the equations with mechanical intuition, recognizing the elegant simplicity underlying complex implementation. This could still revolutionize aviation safety today. Emergency navigation when primary systems fail, protection against electronic warfare. Exactly. Elise agreed, her expression brightening with shared understanding. That's why we've maintained everything all these years, not to hide the technology forever, but to preserve it until it could fulfill its original purpose. She accessed another file displaying what appeared to be implementation strategies for modern applications. We're ready to release the principles behind Starlight for humanitarian applications only, with safeguards against weaponization built into the public documentation. The scope of the plan expanded further, not just preservation of historical truth, but strategic revelation designed to ensure the technology served its intended purpose while preventing military exploitation. Generations of Mitchells and Hawthornes had maintained this hidden knowledge, waiting for the precise conditions that would allow proper implementation. Elise's companion returned with urgent purpose. Dr. Reed has been contacted. She'll arrive at the pre-arranged location tomorrow morning, believing she's meeting Wells's team as agreed. He displayed satellite imagery showing vehicles approaching the regional airport. Wells has dispatched escorts as planned. Everything is proceeding according to timeline. The choreographed precision of the operation reflected decades of preparation, anticipating not just Wells's actions, but institutional responses based on historical patterns. Sloane's grandfather had chosen to walk away from this legacy. Her great-uncle had preserved it specifically for someone like her, someone with mechanical intuition and ethical foundation to understand both the technology and its implications. Elise led Sloane deeper into the facility where historical artifacts from the original Project Starlight had been preserved with museum-quality care. Flight suits, technical manuals, prototype components, a complete historical record beyond what any official archive contained. At the center stood a memorial wall bearing photographs of the original team members, including Theodoric Mitchell and Levi Hawthorne, standing before the aircraft now hidden in the ravine. 7 men made that final flight, Elise explained, her voice softening with inherited memory. 7 men who chose principle over orders, ethics over advancement. They gave up their identities, their military careers, their public recognition, all to prevent a humanitarian innovation from becoming a weapon. The faces looking back from those faded photographs shared a common expression, not defiance or fear, but resolute certainty in their chosen course. They had understood the significance of their decision and accepted its consequences, preserving something more valuable than personal advancement or official recognition. On a separate display stood communication logs, spanning decades, encrypted messages between Theodoric Mitchell and Levi Hawthorne, continuing long after their supposed separation. The men had maintained contact through elaborately secure channels, coordinating the preservation effort across generations, preparing for exactly the scenario now unfolding. Elise traced her finger along the timeline. They knew eventually someone would come looking, someone with sufficient authority and determination to overcome the deliberate obstacles they'd established. When that happened, the contingency would activate. She turned to Sloane with generational purpose. Your arrival at the aircraft site was the trigger. The moment you entered that ravine, systems began activating across the country. Encrypted messages sent personnel, alerted resources, mobilized. The hidden facilities monitoring systems tracked Wells' team's movements across the mountain property, their search patterns expanding, but consistently missing the concealed access road. Samuel remained in the cabin, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Wells' increasing frustration as radio communications continued experiencing selective interference, subtle but persistent electronic disruption focused specifically on coordination frequencies. Elise checked her watch with practiced efficiency. Dr. Reed arrives in 6 hours. Wells expects you to produce her as agreed, unaware you're here instead. She spread diagrams across the conference table detailing the next phase of the operation. This is where you face your choice, Ms. Mitchell. The same choice your great-uncle prepared you for, though you didn't know it. The options laid before Sloane with stark clarity: return to the cabin, maintain the illusion of cooperation while Dr. Reed documented the aircraft and decoy navigation core under Wells's supervision, or remain here allowing the contingency to proceed without her visible participation, with the Dr. Reed meeting Elise's team instead. If I return Wells suspects nothing, Sloane reasoned aloud, processing the tactical considerations. The documentation proceeds under official parameters, creating a record Wells can't easily suppress. Elise nodded, her expression reflecting approval of Sloane's assessment. Precisely. My grandfather and your great-uncle designed this endgame with multiple paths. Your participation isn't required for success, but it creates optimal conditions. She gestured toward the displays tracking Wells's team. They expect you to attempt escape. Your return would disrupt their assumptions, buying crucial time for documentation. And the strategy's elegance emerged from its flexibility. Whether Sloane returned or remained hidden, the contingency would proceed, adapting to either choice rather than requiring a specific outcome. Theodoric Mitchell had designed a system resilient against unpredictability, much like Starlight itself. Max padded over to Sloane, resting his head against her leg with canine perception of her internal conflict. The dog's presence suddenly carried new significance, not just companion, but connection, a living link her great-uncle had arranged years before the inheritance passed to her. Someone had selected Max, specifically had trained him for particular behaviors, had ensured he would be part of Sloane's life when the contingency activated. Elise seemed to read her thoughts. Your great-uncle arranged for Max to find you after your deployment. Sergeant Garrett handled the details, making sure the right dog reached the right Mitchell at the right time. Her expression softened with understanding. He knew you'd need support before you knew you needed it. That's how Theodoric thought, always steps ahead, always considering the human element alongside the technical. The revelation settled over Sloane with emotional weight. Her faithful companion, the one constant through her darkest post-deployment struggles, had been a deliberate gift from a great uncle she'd never met, part of a plan designed decades before her birth. The personal consideration behind such strategic depth testified to Theodoric Mitchell's character perhaps more profoundly than any technical achievement. The monitoring systems beeped with alert notifications. Wells had expanded his search perimeter, again teams approaching previously unsearched sectors, including the overgrown access road leading toward the hidden facility. The timeline was accelerating, forcing decision rather than contemplation. Elise studied the display with practiced assessment. They're adapting faster than anticipated. Wells is more resourceful than his father. She turned to her companions with decisive authority. Implement Protocol Echo, selective visibility on northern quadrant only. The tactical adjustment unfolded with precision, certain sensors along the northern property boundary suddenly becoming detectable to Wells's scanning equipment, creating the impression of hidden technology while keeping the facility itself concealed. The deliberate breadcrumb trail would redirect the search away from their actual location while suggesting partial success to maintain Wells's engagement. Sloane watched the strategic manipulation with growing appreciation for her great-uncle's foresight. The contingency plan incorporated not just technological preservation, but psychological operations against those who would suppress the truth using their own expectations and procedures against them. Your great-uncle believed knowledge has its own timeline, Elise said, observing Sloane's reaction. Some innovations emerge before the world is ethically prepared to manage them. Starlight was one such case technology decades ahead of the moral framework needed to guide its implementation. She gestured toward the historical displays. They didn't hide it to prevent use. They preserved it until humanity could match its capability with appropriate ethical governance. The philosophical principle resonated with Sloane's own experiences in Afghanistan, where technical superiority without ethical foundation had produced consequences far removed from stated objectives. Weapon systems designed for precision had created imprecise suffering. Technological advantages had fostered dependency rather than security. The gap between capability and wisdom remained as relevant in 2023 as in 1904. Monitoring systems registered increased communication from Wells's team as they discovered the deliberately exposed sensors in the northern quadrant. Their search patterns shifted accordingly, resources redirecting exactly as the contingency had anticipated. Samuel remained in the cabin, his expression on security footage suggesting subtle satisfaction as Wells mobilized teams toward the engineered discovery. Elise checked her watch again, the gesture becoming ritual rather than necessity. 3 hours until Dr. Reed arrives. Decision time, Ms. Mitchell. She spread a detailed topographical map across the table marking roads between their current location and the cabin. If you choose to return, we can reinsert you through the northeastern perimeter. Wells will believe you were briefly lost during the search confusion. The choice crystallized with mechanical clarity, not between right and wrong, but between different tactical approaches to the same strategic objective. Return and maintain the illusion of cooperation, creating official documentation. Wells couldn't easily suppress or remain hidden, allowing the contingency to proceed through alternative channels while preserving maximum flexibility for future revelation. Max pressed against Sloane's leg, his canine intuition sensing her decision before she verbalized it. The dog's steadfast presence, arranged by a great uncle she'd never met, but whose legacy now rested in her hands, provided unexpected clarity. Some responsibilities transcended personal safety or immediate objectives. Some truths required guardians willing to stand visible against institutional power. Sloane turned to Elise with resolute certainty, her decision reflecting the same principled determination that had guided Theodoric Mitchell and Levi Hawthorne decades earlier. The inheritance wasn't just land or technology, it was purpose, the obligation to ensure innovation served humanity rather than control. Wells represented institutional power without ethical foundation. The contingency represented ethical foundation without institutional power. The choice between them defined not just personal allegiance, but philosophical alignment. The monitoring system beeped again, displaying Wells's team approaching the northern sensors with tactical precision. The operation was entering its critical phase, decades of preparation converging toward the moment when Project Starlight's true history would finally emerge from shadows into documented record. Whatever Sloan decided, her great-uncle's legacy would finally fulfill its purpose, not just preserving technology, but protecting the truth it was designed to serve. Part the revelation and transformation. The mountain dawn painted shadows across Wells's search perimeter tactical teams, moving with increasing frustration through sectors that continuously yielded nothing significant. In the hidden facility, Sloan studied the monitoring screens showing Wells' operation from multiple angles. Every futile search pattern confirmed what Elise had explained: her great-uncle's contingency plan wasn't just years in the making, but generations. "I'm going back," Sloan announced her decision, crystallizing with mechanical certainty. "Wells expects me to run. My return creates confusion, while Dr. Reed documents everything." Elise's expression shifted from surprise to respect. "Your great-uncle would make the same choice. Hiding is temporary. Documentation is permanent." The reinsertment operation unfolded with practiced precision. Using the facility's surveillance systems to track security gaps, Elise's team guided Sloan through concealed mountain paths that bypassed Wells' perimeter sensors. Max moved with silent efficiency beside her, the dog's training evident in how he navigated terrain specifically prepared for this scenario. The northeastern perimeter, where communications consistently experienced the most disruption, provided the optimal entry point. Sloan and Max slipped through a momentary gap in patrol patterns deliberately timed to coincide with shift rotation. The tactical team's response followed exactly as predicted: brief radio chatter followed by Wells himself approaching their position, his expression caught between suspicion and relief. "Ms. Mitchell, interesting timing. We've been searching for hours." Wells maintained professional composure despite evident frustration. Sloan matched his neutral tone. "We got disoriented in the dark. Max finally found familiar scent markers." She glanced toward the cabin where Samuel remained under guard. "I'd like to check on Sergeant Garrett." The subtle shift in Wells' expression revealed the contingency's effectiveness. His operational focus now divided between the missing researcher, the recovered fugitive, and the electronic signatures detected in the northern quadrant. Multiple concurrent challenges prevented comprehensive response to any single element, creating exactly the operational gaps the contingency had been designed to exploit. Samuel's weathered face betrayed no surprise at Sloan's return, his eyes conveying understanding of her tactical choice. The old sergeant maintained his role with the discipline of decades, providing no indication of alternative operations beyond Wells's assault awareness. The metal case containing the decoy navigation core remained on the table under constant guard bait, made more convincing by apparent protection. Wells established a command position in the cabin, coordinating teams investigating the northern sensors while maintaining supervision over Sloan and Samuel. "Dr. Reed's vehicle passed the county checkpoint 20 minutes ago. She'll arrive within the hour." His attention shifted to Sloan with calculated assessment. "Our agreement stands. 24 hours of documentation, then everything related to Project Starlight comes with us." Sloan nodded with deliberate ambiguity. The contingency had entered its implementation phase. Wells's cooperation or obstruction would influence tactical details, but not strategic outcome. Dr. Evelyn Reed arrived precisely on schedule, her academic demeanor initially masking sharp intelligence as she exited the government escort vehicle. Slim and energetic despite her 65 years, the historian carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to institutional resistance. Her assessment of the cabin and surrounding military-style operation revealed neither surprise nor intimidation, merely professional interest. Wells intercepted her before she could speak with Sloan, establishing parameters with bureaucratic precision. "Dr. Reed, I'm Harrison Wells, Department of Defense Liaison. Your access is conditional on signed and non-disclosure agreements. Nothing leaves this site without security review." "Mr. Wells, I've worked with classified aviation projects for 20 years. I understand the protocols." Dr. Reed adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses with academic detachment before turning to Sloan. "You must be Mitchell's great niece. Your discovery represents the most significant undocumented aircraft recovery of the post-war period." The historian's focus on historical significance rather than technology, confirmed her role in the contingency, a credible independent voice whose documentation would establish historical record regardless of subsequent classification. Wells might control the physical artifacts, but narrative authority would rest with academic documentation he couldn't easily suppress. The morning unfolded with choreographed precision as Wells directed his team to transport Dr. Reed to the aircraft site, maintaining close supervision while establishing apparent cooperation. Sloan accompanied them, watching how the historian documented everything with methodical thoroughness: photographs, measurements, material, samples, detailed notes on configuration and modifications. Every element entered academic record, creating documentation beyond Wells' authority to erase. Dr. Reed approached her task with the efficiency of someone who recognized limited opportunity. This aircraft configuration matches theoretical descriptions of Project Starlight from declassified fragments, but with significant modifications absent from official records. Her attention focused on the navigation systems with practiced assessment. The integration of experimental components with standard C-87 systems shows remarkable engineering innovation, particularly these custom-designed stabilization modules. The historian's identification of specific technical elements suggested deeper knowledge than her published work indicated. Her documentation focused systematically on elements essential to establishing the aircraft's historical significance while creating comprehensive record of its technical innovations. Wells maintained constant presence during the examination, his attention divided between monitoring the historian's work and coordinating teams investigating the electronic signatures in the northern quadrant. The contingency applied pressure across multiple fronts, simultaneously stretching his operational bandwidth increasingly thin. Samuel remained at the cabin under guard, his occasional glances toward his wristwatch, maintaining the timeline's rhythm. The contingency unfolded in sequence rather than concurrently, preventing Wells from recognizing the coordinated pattern until individual components had achieved their objectives. By mid-afternoon, Dr. Reed completed preliminary aircraft documentation, her professional efficiency maximizing results within Wells's imposed constraints. "I'll need to examine the navigation core and any recovered documentation to establish comprehensive historical context." She addressed the request to Sloan rather than Wells, subtly reinforcing ownership distinctions despite government claims. Back at the cabin, the historian examined the decoy navigation core with convincing interest, her notes creating official record that would withstand subsequent scrutiny. The technical specifications she documented matched those visible in the device without revealing the subtle discrepancies that distinguished it from the genuine articles secured in the hidden facility. As evening approached, Dr. Reed requested private consultation with Sloan, establishing academic discussion separate from Wells's direct monitoring. The historian's expression conveyed professional interest masking deeper purpose. "Ms. Mitchell, your great-uncle's role in Project Starlight has been systematically erased from official records. Theodoric Mitchell appears in technical documentation through 1944, then vanishes completely." The observation created opportunity for Sloan to share selective information without revealing the contingency's full scope. "My great-uncle left journals suggesting ethical conflicts about the project's military applications. He and Lieutenant Hawthorne designed Starlight as navigation safety technology, not electronic warfare." Dr. Reed nodded, pieces connecting with an established historical framework. "That aligns with fragmentary evidence I've assembled over years of research. Starlight's original purpose appears fundamentally different from its military classification." She lowered her voice despite the apparent privacy. "Certain technological innovations disappear from history when their creators withdraw support. The question becomes whether that disappearance serves or hinders humanity's progress. The philosophical framework established common understanding without exposing operational details. Dr. Reed's documentation would establish historical narrative regardless of whatever physical evidence. Wells ultimately secured the truth preserved in academic record, even if the technology remained classified." Their conversation was interrupted by Wells, who approached with operational urgency. His team leaders had reported significant findings in the northern sector, requiring his personal assessment. The contingency's timing achieved perfect synchronization, drawing Wells away precisely as Dr. Reed completed preliminary documentation, creating opportunity for the next phase. Samuel seized the moment with veteran's precision, his voice carrying quiet authority despite his apparent captivity. Dr. Reed, there's something you should examine before darkness limits visibility. The crash site contains elements not immediately apparent in daylight. The historian recognized the cue gathering her equipment with academic efficiency. Indeed, many aircraft crash sites reveal additional evidence under different lighting conditions. We should examine the ravine before losing today's opportunity. Wells hesitated, operational priorities competing for limited resources. His team had discovered something significant in the northern quadrant requiring leadership presence, yet the historian's continued documentation demanded supervision. The contingency had created precisely the division of attention that forced suboptimal allocation of resources. Jackson escorted them to the aircraft site, maintained direct supervision, no unauthorized access to any components. Wells issued the compromise directive before departing with his primary team toward the northern findings. His operational coverage stretched beyond effective control. The tactical gap created exactly the opportunity the contingency had designed. Samuel led Dr. Reed and Sloan toward the ravine under single-guard supervision, Max ranging ahead with apparent casual exploration that actually confirmed predetermined signals. The dog's behavior shifted subtly as they approached a specific section of forest boundary, his attention focusing on something beyond human perception. Samuel leaned heavily on his walking stick, his apparent frailty, a calculated performance, masking veteran capability. The light at this hour reveals structural details often missed in direct sunlight, the aircraft's port side particularly. The direction guided Dr. Reed towards a specific approach angle, her academic interest providing natural justification for movement patterns designed decades earlier. The guard maintained professional vigilance but lacked contextual understanding to recognize the choreographed navigation through seemingly random forest paths. Max froze suddenly, his posture signaling alert attention. The guard tensed reflexively, attention momentarily diverted from his human charges to the potential threat indicated by the dog. In that critical moment of divided focus, Samuel executed a movement belying his apparent age, swift, precise, and incapacitating without permanent injury. The guard collapsed unconscious before registering the attack's source, Samuel catching him with practiced ease to prevent noise. Non-lethal pressure point technique. He'll recover in approximately 20 minutes with no lasting effects. The old sergeant's efficiency revealed military training far beyond his official record. We have limited time before Wells realizes communications have failed. Dr. Reed's academic demeanor shifted instantly to operational focus, her role in the contingency emerging from scholarly disguise. The Northern Quadrant discovery will occupy Wells for 17 minutes based on historical operational patterns. Extraction team is positioned at coordinates Charlie 7. Samuel secured the unconscious guard with practiced efficiency, ensuring both humane treatment and effective containment. Sloan, you have final decision authority. The contingency proceeds with or without your participation, but optimal outcome requires your choice. Max pressed against her leg, the dog's unwavering loyalty representing connection to inheritance larger than property or technology. The choice clarified with mechanical precision, not between opposing values, but between implementation strategies serving the same core principle. I'm staying visible. Sloan decided the choice reflecting both tactical assessment and philosophical alignment. Wells needs official opposition, not just invisible resistance. Dr. Reed documents everything while I maintain legal standing as property owner. Samuel nodded with veteran's approval. Your great uncle predicted this choice. The Mitchell conscience runs true across generations. Dr. Reed consulted her watch with operational precision. Extraction team moves in 5 minutes. We need to establish your plausible deniability regarding the guard's incapacitation. She surveyed the surroundings with tactical assessment. Evidence suggests you were examining the aircraft when Samuel and the guard had an altercation beyond your awareness. The scenario construction reflected years of preparation for this specific moment, creating operational latitude with incredible deniability. Sloan would maintain legitimate standing as cooperative property owner, while the contingency implemented its core objective, comprehensive documentation of Project Starlight's true nature beyond government suppression. The approaching vehicles stopped just beyond visual range, maintaining operational security while establishing extraction capability. He'd handed Sloan a small device resembling an ordinary thumb drive. This contains everything technical specifications, historical documentation, ethical framework for civilian implementation. It activates when connected to any internet-capable device. The technology transfer completed decades of preparation, converting physical legacy into digital distribution beyond institutional control. Whatever happened to the aircraft or decoy navigation core, the essential truth would survive through documented records secured against suppression. Samuel grasped Sloane's shoulder with weathered hand, the gesture conveying generational connection. Your grandfather walked away from this legacy because the time wasn't right. Your great-uncle preserved it because he believed someday it would be. That day has arrived. His eyes conveyed certainty earned through decades of vigilance. Some innovations aren't meant for weapons. They're meant for protection. Starlight was always about bringing people home safely. Reed resumed her academic persona with practiced ease, her documentation continuing with scholarly thoroughness, as though the operational interlude had never occurred. Ms. Mitchell, these modifications to the navigation systems show remarkable innovation for 1944 technology. Your great-uncle's engineering insight appears decades ahead of contemporary understanding. Samuel departed with the extraction team disappearing into the forest with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this movement for decades. Within minutes, all traces of their presence vanished, leaving only Sloan and Dr. Reed at the aircraft site. Wells' return occurred precisely within the contingency's projected timeline, his expression shifting from operational focus to suspicious assessment as he observed the guard's absence. "Where is Jackson?" "He and Sergeant Garrett had some kind of altercation while we were examining the navigation systems," Sloan replied with composed neutrality. "I was documenting component configurations with Dr. Reed when we heard struggle beyond the clearing. By the time we investigated, both had disappeared into the forest." Dr. Reed reinforced the narrative with academic distraction, displaying documentation that commanded professional attention despite the security breach. "Mr. Wells, these navigation modifications indicate fundamental reconceptualization of standard approaches. The integration of magnetic variance compensation with internal reference calibration represents innovation not documented in any declassified material from this period. The historian's strategic information sharing created cognitive disruption, offering valuable insights that demanded Wells' expertise while establishing academic record beyond his authority to suppress. His attention divided between security breach and historical significance, creating operational paralysis the contingency had specifically designed to exploit. Wells dispatched search teams to locate the missing guard, and Samuel his operational coverage stretching beyond effective control as resources divided across multiple objectives. Dr. Reed continued documentation with scholarly precision, each photograph and notation establishing permanent record, regardless of subsequent classification. The engineering approach suggests defensive rather than offensive application, maintaining navigation integrity against interference rather than creating disruption. Dr. Reed observed her academic tone masking strategic framing. This fundamentally contradicts declassified program objectives from 1945 forward. The historical framing created academic context for ethical reassessment, establishing narrative foundation that would support the contingency's ultimate objective, revealing Starlight's original humanitarian purpose while preventing its weaponized implementation. By nightfall, Wells received confirmation that Samuel had disappeared completely, multiple search patterns revealing no trace despite thermal imaging and tracking dogs. The old sergeant's decades of preparation had created escape routes specifically designed to defeat modern surveillance technology, his knowledge of the mountain exceeding any temporary security perimeter. Dr. Reed completed her documentation with scholarly thoroughness, her academic credentials ensuring the record would withstand subsequent scrutiny regardless of classification. "I've established sufficient historical context to confirm this aircraft represents previously undocumented configuration of Project Starlight, with technical innovations absent from declassified material." The historian's deliberate phrasing established academic framework beyond Wells's authority to contest, creating permanent record that would persist regardless of whatever physical evidence the government ultimately secured. The contingency had achieved its primary objective, truth preservation, through documented history rather than physical artifacts. Wells directed his team to secure all documented material for classification review, asserting procedural authority while maintaining operational focus on the missing sergeant and guard. All photographs and notes are subject to security protocol. Nothing leaves this site without proper clearance. DeRay Reed surrendered materials with academic compliance, masking strategic purpose, the documented record already secured through multiple redundant channels beyond Wells' awareness. The visible materials represented merely the official layer of documentation, while the contingency had established parallel record through concealed methods developed over decades. Sloan maintained property owner standing with calculated persistence, neither obstructing government operations nor surrendering legal rights. The 24-hour documentation period continues until tomorrow morning. Dr. Reed should complete her historical assessment before anything leaves the site. As midnight approached, the operational tempo shifted towards sustained monitoring rather than active intervention. Wells established rotation schedules for perimeter security while technical teams prepared the aircraft for eventual extraction. The cabin became command center for ongoing operations with Sloan and Dr. Reed maintained under supervision, while search teams continued seeking Samuel through progressively wider patterns. The next morning brought tactical shift as Wells received authorization for complete site control government vehicles, arriving with specialized equipment for aircraft extraction and comprehensive security coverage. The official narrative solidified around classified technology recovery, with Dr. Reed's historical documentation subjected to rigorous classification review before potential release. The extraction operation itself became the contingency's final visible component, a spectacle that concealed deeper purpose. Military helicopters arrived with specialized equipment designed to lift the massive aircraft without further damage. Engineers assessed structural integrity, while extraction specialists established lift points and stabilization systems. Wells supervised the operation with evident satisfaction. His mission objectives apparently achieved despite security complications. The physical evidence would enter government custody through official channels consistent with classification protocols established decades earlier. Yet his victory remained hollow. The essential truth of Starlight's original purpose and ethical foundation had already escaped through channels beyond institutional control. As midday approached, cables secured to strategic points on the aircraft's structure tensed under increasing pressure from the hovering helicopters. Decades of environmental integration yielded reluctantly as the massive form began separating from its resting place. Roots that had grown through metal pulled free. Moss and vegetation that had colonized surfaces fell away in sheets. Water that had partially submerged lower sections drained with reluctant gurgling. The aircraft rose from its 70-year grave with ponderous dignity, suspended between three military helicopters, working in synchronized coordination. Sunlight touched surfaces that had known only forest shadow for generations, revealing the ghost of military insignia, deliberately obscured before its controlled crash landing. What had been secret became spectacle, the hidden past emerging into stark daylight. Sloan watched with complex emotions as her great-uncle's legacy ascended. The physical artifact might enter government custody, but its truth had already spread beyond containment. Dr. Reed stood beside her, professional composure masking satisfaction at mission completion. The historian had fulfilled her role with excellence, establishing documented record that would persist through academic channels, regardless of government classification decisions. Historical truth often follows different paths than physical artifacts. Dr. Reed observed her scholarly phrasing carrying double meaning. Documentation ensures some journeys continue long after others appear complete. As the helicopters departed with their suspended cargo, Wells approached Sloan with measured professionalism, his expression suggesting reassessment of her role in events. Your cooperation during documentation is noted, Ms. Mitchell. The property remains yours, though certain access restrictions will apply to the aircraft recovery site. He extended business card with government contact information. If you reconsider the compensation offer, the terms remain available. The contingency had anticipated this outcome, government securing physical evidence while attempting to manage Sloan through financial incentive rather than legal pressure. The approach revealed institutional assumption that individuals valued monetary compensation above historical truth, a miscalculation that had informed the contingency's design from inception. Sloan watched the final government vehicles depart the mountain property, returning to apparent normalcy as tactical equipment and personnel withdrew along the narrow access road. Max remained at her side, the dog's mission continuing beyond the operational phase into long-term companionship. Only the disturbed earth in the ravine and lingering tire tracks suggested anything significant had occurred. The thumb drive in her pocket represented continuation rather than conclusion, digital preservation of legacy that would spread through channels beyond government control once activated. Her great-uncle and Hawthorne had designed the contingency not merely to protect technology, but to ensure its eventual implementation for original humanitarian purpose. 3 weeks later, Sloan stood in her grandfather's shop, surveying changes already underway. The foreclosure notice no longer threatened an anonymous banking transaction, had cleared the mortgage, and provided modernization funds with surgical precision. New equipment stood alongside carefully preserved historical tools, creating bridge between generations of Mitchell mechanical expertise. The phone rang, Dr. Reed's academic voice carrying operational undertones despite secure connection. Historical documentation has entered secure academic channels, Ms. Mitchell. Project Starlight's original purpose now exists in permanent record beyond classification authority. The confirmation established mission success, truth preservation through documented history rather than physical artifacts. Whatever happened to the aircraft or a navigation core, the essential narrative had escaped institutional constraint through channels designed specifically for academic persistence. 3 research universities have already initiated projects based on the declassified principles. Dr. Uishapam. Reed continued, civilian aviation safety applications only no military involvement. The ethical framework document is proving particularly effective at guiding implementation. The strategic distribution had begun ensuring Starlight's principles would develop through civilian research rather than classified military application. The innovation would finally fulfill its creator's intention, bringing people home safely, rather than preventing others from finding their way. And Samuel Sloan asked the old sergeant's absence still adjustment after decades of vigilant presence on the mountain. Comfortably established under new identity, consulting on certain aspects of the technical implementation. Dr. Reed's voice softened with personal rather than professional appreciation. He asked me to convey that your decision met highest expectations. The Mitchell conscience indeed runs true across generations. The conversation confirmed what Sloan had begun to suspect: the contingency extended far beyond the mountain property, with components and participants distributed across multiple sectors. Samuel's extraction represented not conclusion, but transition, his role evolving from visible guardian to hidden advisor as implementation phase replaced preservation. 6 months later, Sloan participated in video conference with Elise Hawthorne, their conversation bridging geographical distance while maintaining operational security. The screen displayed implementation updates from multiple research sites, each developing component applications focused on aviation safety systems immune to interference. University of Michigan team has achieved breakthrough in signal integrity, preservation under extreme conditions. Elise reported professional satisfaction evident in her expression. 4th-generation prototype demonstrates 97% effectiveness without external reference points. The development confirms successful implementation strategy, Starlight's core principles evolving through civilian research toward original humanitarian purpose. Without direct military application, the technology developed toward humanitarian rather than weaponized implementation, exactly as its creators had intended. The Congressional Committee has scheduled hearings on historical classification review. Elise continued shifting to political developments. Dr. Reed testifies next month regarding ethical implications of withholding civilian safety technology. Harrison Wells has been notably absent from recent Pentagon briefings. The institutional landscape had begun shifting political assessment, evolving to recognize distinction between legitimate classification and institutional suppression. Wells found himself increasingly marginalized, his family's multi-generational pursuit of Starlight's weaponization potential undermined by changing political framework. Sloan's attention shifted to blueprints spread across her grandfather's workbench, designs for specialized aviation components based on Starlight's principles adapted for civilian emergency systems. Her mechanical expertise had found new application developing practical implementations of her great-uncle's theoretical innovations. Your contribution to the university research team has been pivotal. Elise noted, recognizing Sloane's evolution from reluctant heir to active participant. They've integrated 3 of your modified stabilization components into the latest prototype. The collaboration represented fulfillment of generational trust, Sloan applying Mitchell mechanical intuition to implement Hawthorne theoretical design, just as their forebears had 8 decades earlier. The partnership continued across generations, preserving both innovation and ethical framework guiding its implementation. 1 year after discovering the aircraft, Sloan received formal invitation to dedication ceremony for Theodoric Mitchell Navigation Safety Research Laboratory at prestigious Aerospace Engineering University. The recognition represented institutional acknowledgement of contribution deliberately erased from official record for 70 years, truth preserved through private courage, finally receiving public recognition. The lab would develop civilian applications for Starlight's principles, continuing innovation trajectory toward its original humanitarian purpose, while maintaining ethical framework against weaponization. What had begun as classified military project had transformed through generational preservation into civilian safety system with potential to revolutionize emergency navigation capabilities. On her desk rested framed letter from Federal Aviation Administration requesting consultation on new navigation safety protocols inspired by historical research into alternative reference systems. The invitation represented institutional acceptance of principles once suppressed, creating framework for legitimate implementation beyond classified restrictions. The shop's landline rang with distinctive pattern established for secure communications, the network connecting contingency participants across country without relying on traceable digital channels. Max lifted his head from his customary spot beneath the desk alert to the particular ring pattern that signaled important communication. The voice belonged to Samuel, his weathered tone carrying satisfaction earned through decades of vigilance. Special announcement today from Department of Transportation. New emergency navigation systems for commercial aircraft based on independent reference technology. First, public implementation of core principles. The development represented culmination of 8 decades of preservation. Starlight's transformation from classified weapon to civilian safety system complete. The journey from concealment to implementation had required 3 generations of steadfast guardianship, each making different but complementary contributions to shared purpose. As evening approached, Sloan closed the shop with practiced routine. The business her grandfather started, now transformed through legacy her great-uncle preserved. The journey had begun with foreclosure notice and inheritance she hadn't sought, proceeding through historical discovery and institutional confrontation before culminating in purpose that transcended both financial security and personal recognition. Max patted beside her as she surveyed the renovated space tools arranged with military precision, the ancient hydraulic lift her grandfather had rebuilt in '82, now restored to perfect function. The sign above the door had changed, however, no longer Mitchell & Son Auto Repair, but simply Mitchell Engineering, reflecting both historical continuity and future direction. The wall behind her desk displayed 3 photographs representing generational continuity: her grandfather in his shop on opening day 1963, her great-uncle Theodoric standing beside aircraft in 1944, and most recently is Sloan herself at university laboratory dedication bearing his name. Different paths, different choices, but shared inheritance of mechanical intuition and ethical foundation. The foreclosure notice that once threatened her grandfather's legacy now sat framed on office wall, reminder that inheritance transcended property or technology. The true legacy passed from Theodoric to Sloan wasn't patents or innovations, but responsibility to ensure advancement served protection rather than destruction, bringing people home safely rather than preventing others from finding their way. Starlight had finally emerged from shadow into legitimate implementation, its journey from classified weapon to civilian safety system, reflecting larger truth about innovation's dual nature. Technology itself remained neutral. Purpose determined whether advancement served protection or destruction. The Mitchell family had maintained that distinction across 3 generations, preserving ethical foundation when institutional pressure demanded weaponization. Some treasures weren't gold or jewels, but courage to protect what's right. For Sloan Mitchell, what seemed lost had been waiting for the right person to find it, not merely rusted aircraft in Georgia forest, but moral compass guiding technology toward humanitarian rather than destructive application. The shop that almost slipped away had become foundation for something more meaningful than business alone, continuation of Mitchell legacy spanning generations. The mechanical precision her grandfather taught had found purpose. Her great-uncle preserved, creating connection that transcended individual lifetimes. Sloan Mitchell turned off the lights, Max following with companionable loyalty. The grease-stained mechanic, who once stared at foreclosure notice with trembling hands, had found her place in generational continuum, not just fixing what others had broken, but building what future generations would inherit.